Well, hello everyone. Hello to Eric the Great and Veronica at the wall, and anyone else who's watching us at the minute. I see there's about 12 of you there. So we have our good friend Odon Lafontaine back with us.
Hello everyone.
And so it's really great to have you back. There was a lot of feedback on your thesis since we last saw you, and thank you so much for replying to so many of the comments. It's obviously generated a lot of discussion, really helpful discussion, and I think anything academic, it's good to bounce things around and get feedback, and through that maybe things get ironed out and clarified and so on. So welcome back. Today you're going to be talking about the Nazarene reading of the Quran.
Exactly. It's the second part of my expose on the what you named the Quranic evidence. During the first part, we talked about the people of the book, and we established, based only on the Quran, that the people of the book are not what the Standard Islamic Narrative says it is. Tells it is. It is not Christian or Jews or Muslims or everything together. It is the people of the scripture, the Jewish scriptures, mostly the Torah. And so the people of the book are Jewish people, are Jews. And we established it by a systematic study of the mentions of the people of the book, the Al-Kitab in the text. And by doing so, we also established that there is a community within the people of the book that the Quranic text distinguishes from the other people of the book. There is a good community among the people of the book, a good Judean Jewish community, which is who are friends with the believers, with the mu'minin, the Arabs that listen to the preaching of that we find in the Quranic text, and they are also teachers of some sort for those Arabs. We don't know whether they teach themselves or whether they have teachers that are taught by them to teach the Arabs. But one thing is now for sure, in the Quranic text, there is a very small Jewish community that is defined and that is described as being very close to maybe the first Muslims. So it exists. We have established, based only on the Quran, that it exists. And once we have established it, we can build new hypotheses on this new ground, on this new, very solid ground. And this is what I intend to do now. And in this second part of the expose, I will try to prove, again, using only the Quranic text, that this good community among the Jews are the Quranic Nazarenes. And the Quranic Nazarenes only. I don't know whether there are Nazarenes from the past. I can only tell based on the Quran what the Quranic Nazarenes are. And so let's begin the presentation. What should I do? I should do this. Do you see the presentation?
Not just take a second or two to show.
Do you see it, Mel?
No.
Yes.
Have you clicked the share button?
Not yet.
Okay. While you're organizing that, I just respond to Tony Holly. I believe I missed some of your questions the last day, so when we come to question time at the end, I'll make sure you get first call on the questions. Okay, Tony? apologies for missing the lab. Okay. Now, I think we got your PowerPoint added to the stream.
Okay. Do you want me to go on? Do you want to answer the questions? You're the maestro, Mel.
No. This be for. Yeah, no. Go ahead. We'll do questions at the end. So, over to you, Odon.
Okay then. So, second part of the Nazarene reading of the Quran. Let's have a look at the Quranic Nazarenes. Who are they? And I will use the exact same method as before, as with the people of the books and the mushrikun and the kuffar, which is to look at every occurrence of the word Nazarene, Nasara, Nasrani in the Quran. At first, we can tell that the word Nasara is a strange word. It's a strange Arabic word, because as you know, every word in Arabic, as in every Semitic language such as Hebrew or Aramaic, is based on three consonantal roots. In this case, it's NSR. And this root in Arabic, NSR, means help, support, protection. And we don't see how the Nasara, the Nazarene, pertains to help, support, protection. There are other words which are built on this NSR root, mainly the word Ansar, and we find 44 mentions of the Ansar word in the Quranic text, which means helper, protector, ally, auxiliary. And Nasara, that does not really fit the Arabic meaning of this root. It does not fit the helper meaning. But in some occurrences, in some cases, Ansar might refer to Nasara people. It might be true. It's an hypothesis. So in the Standard Islamic Narrative, of course, the Nasara, the Nazarene, the Quranic Nazarene are supposed to be Christians. But there are some strange mentions of the word Nazarene in the Quran, in which this meaning of Christian cannot stand. And even Muslim scholars...
Odon, that's...
Yes.
That's interesting because so what you're suggesting is that, okay, we have the hypothesis, according to the Islamic narrative, that Nazarene refers to Christians. Well, let's look at the Quranic text and see, does it actually fit? And so that's a good approach to take, to actually test it out, whether it actually fits with the meaning of Christian or not.
Yes, it's a good approach. I won't do it. I won't do it now. It's not what I intended to do.
No.
But you see, the work I'm presenting, this presentation, is based on this. At the beginning of questioning about the meaning of the Quranic text, there is the contradiction within the standard Islamic narrative. Because in some verses we see Nazarenes described as being close friends to the believers, and in some other verses they are enemies. And one is then pushed to think, to wonder why is there such a contradiction in the text? How can the same people being both friends and enemies? This is one of the many contradictions who triggered the study I'm presenting, and for everyone to remember it and to get it. This is mainly based on the work of Edouard Marie Galez, who is a Belgian scholar. I worked with him. He published a thesis called The Messiah and His Prophets, And what I've done with the book, The Great Secret of Islam, is a sort of vulgarization of his work and a development also of his work and his studies, and particularly his studies about the Quran. Yes. Yes, Mel?
Yeah, you said to me that, you had said to me that Edouard Marie Gallès was aware of these videos that we've been doing on his work, and he seemed to be pleased with what we were doing so far.
Yes, I think so. You see, Edouard Marie is a friend, a close friend of mine. I have him on a weekly basis on the phone. I try to see him often, but as he's living in Belgium, it's and me in Paris. It's a bit difficult now with the lockdown and curfews and everything about this COVID situation. But yes, he's following what we do, and he was very impressed with the interpretation you made, Mel, about the rab word in the Quranic text as being potentially, as having potentially two meanings. One is Lord, of course, and it pertains to God or to Jesus, and the other being teacher, rabbi. Rabbi is a teacher, and we see that it makes sense with the text. It fits the text, and maybe it's a way to understand it much better. And this is what he did, to have a look at the text and to try to get what it means, what it literally means. And we see that the standard Islamic narrative is not based on the literal meaning of the text, but it refers to other books, another literature, which is the Sunnah, the biography of Muhammad, the Hadith, and so on. And the standard Islamic narrative tries to explain the Quran with a sort of filter, through the filter of the Sunnah. And it is not exactly the literal meaning of the text. And this is what we are trying to do tonight, is to get to the literal meaning, the raw meaning of the text in Arabic. And we'll see then who are the Quranic Nazarenes using this method. So as we were discussing it, the standard Islamic narrative tells us that the Nazarene, the Quranic Nazarene, the Nasara in the Quran, are supposed to be Christian, but even the Muslim scholars have to acknowledge that it does not fit every mention of the word Nasara in the Quran. And for some of them, they are compelled to invent that another meaning to the word. For example, in Surah 5, verse 82, they invent that Nasara means Christian, but could also mean a Jewish community, a Jewish Christian community, but who is not Christian like the other Christians, in order to fit the standard Islamic narrative. But the thing with this word, like I told you, it's very strange. It's not an Arabic word, in fact. I told you that its meaning does not fit the meaning of the NSR Arabic root, because in fact, actually, this word is not an Arabic word. It is the direct transliteration into Arabic of the Aramaic word Natsaraya, which is the same word as in Hebrew, Notzri. This is what the linguists have established. I could refer to Robert Kerr study, Aramaism in the Quran, in which he explains how Nasara is a direct transliteration of the Aramaic word Natsaraya. And so, you see, for for non-native English speaker like me, we have the same phenomenon. We have the same issue with English word being directly transliterated into our language and not having the exact same meaning as in the original language. For example, parking. Parking has not the same meaning in French, because now it has become a French word, than in English. But at the beginning, it had the exact same meaning. So this is why it's important to know what Nazaraya means in Aramaic, and why it was then transliterated. It was then put into Arabic. So in Aramaic, it's the same system with three consonantal roots, but it's not exactly the same root. It's N, Z, R with a tzade. It's not an S, it's a tzade. The scholars write it with a little dot under the S. You can also write it as big T and small s, and it's not the same letter as Z. It's not NZR. NZR means, for example, Nazir. Nazir. A Nazir is someone in the Bible, as the Bible tells it. Nazir is someone who consecrates himself to God. For example, John the Baptist was a Nazir. But you see, it's not the same word as Nazaraya. It's not the same meaning exactly. And we have to look into what Nazaraya means.
So these are often confused.
Yes, they are confused mainly because, you see, in the Greek translation of the Bible and the Gospel, especially the Gospels, the Greek doesn't know, the Greek language doesn't know the Semitic tzade. It only has one Z letter for both NZR and NZR. And so a confusion has been made, mainly in the Western world and by some Western scholars, between Nazir and Nazaraya. And some scholars claim that, for example, Jesus was a Nazir because he was called a Nazarene. But Nazarene has nothing to do with Nazir. It has everything to do with Nazaraya. And with this NZR root in Aramaic, which basically means to keep, to watch with care, to protect, to preserve, to conserve. And as in it is the case in every Semitic language, also in Arabic, it has many derived meanings. You see, you have one basic meaning, and thereafter, with the word being used, new meanings appear. And so the NZR is used as to mean what is conserved, what is preserved. And we look at it in the Bible in Isaiah.
Odon.
Yes. Yes, Mel?
Sorry to interrupt you. So essentially in the gospel where the angel at the resurrection refers to Jesus the Nazarene. I think it's in that part of the gospel, if I'm not mistaken. So the meaning isn't just Jesus of Nazareth here, but it means Jesus the keeper, the protector, the preserver. That's the essential meaning of it.
We'll get to it, but because Jesus is called Nazarene also because he comes from Nazareth. But what does it mean? What does it mean exactly to come from Nazareth?
Yeah.
I intend to explain it right now. So I wanted to point at this meaning, special meaning as branch, as we see it in Isaiah 11. And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch, a netzer, shall grow out of his roots. Branch has the meaning of what has been preserved, what has been conserved. And because we see it in Isaiah, because Isaiah and the Jewish people believed it. It has gained a new meaning as being the descendant, the royal blood of David, the King David. So the Netzer is the branch, but with the image of Isaiah, it becomes the prince, the descendant of David, the one who has a claim to Israel's kingship. And so there is a new meaning there. Netzer does not mean the one who is preserved. It still means the one who is preserved, but it now also means the descendant of David, the prince, the future prince, the future king. And from this, and also because of Isaiah's prophecy, as the prince, as the king should be a Messiah. A Messiah is someone who has been anointed, rubbed with oil, with sacred oil by the high priest. The Netzer become also gains a new meaning pertaining to the Messiahship. The Nazariah is the Netzer is the prince, and yes. Yes, Mel.
So this group will essentially, so this group would be likely a messianic group in the sense of interested in the apocalypse and things like that. You'd expect based on the meaning behind this word.
No, this would be at this time of the presentation a bit anachronistic. Here I'm talking about the meaning of the word in the ancient times, before
originally
Christ.
Going back. All right. Okay. Okay.
Before Christ, before Jesus was named Christ, which means Messiah, because this changed everything in the for this world.
Yeah.
And so the Nazariah before Jesus were messianic people before Jesus, and so the city of Nazareth. This is an explanation by Etienne Naudet, who is a French scholar at the Biblical School of Jerusalem. He's saying that Nazareth is named Nazareth because it is the city of the Netzer, the city of the branch, the city of the royal blood of David. And so the people of Nazareth, who live in Nazareth, who are native of Nazareth, are, of course, Nazariah. And it's the same, it's a bit of the same word to say, I come from Nazareth and I am a Nazariah. And so when we see in Matthew that in Matthew, there are some verse that tells us that Joseph and Mary and Jesus came back to Nazareth, and hence the prophecy was fulfilled. The Messiah, Jesus is called Nazareth. He's called Nazareter, a man from Nazareth. But it's the same word as, it's exactly the same meaning as being a Nazariah. Do you see my point here, Mel? You asked the question.
Yeah,
you see, being a native of Nazareth, like Joseph was, maybe Mary also, it's the same as having royal blood of the Davidic royal blood. It's the same as being a Netzer. And so it's the same as being a kind of Nazariah. And so a new meaning then to Seder root. But then Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, and he was said by many to be the real true Messiah of Israel. And so then the Nazariah, the Messianic people, became the Jewish disciples of Jesus. And this is why we find it in the Acts of the Apostle. I don't know whether it's the Roman authority or the Judean authorities who say that Paul is the leader of the Nazariah sect cult. And it's because Nazarene was used by the first Christians, by the first disciples of Jesus, the first Jewish disciple of Jesus, to call themselves. They were messianic people, and they recognized Jesus as the Messiah. And this is why also we found the word on the titulus crucis, the the word that were written on the cross, on Jesus' cross, Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews, King of the Judeans. Why Nazarene? It's Nazariah because he claimed to be the Messiah. And this is the meaning of the titulus crucis. But we also read in the Acts that very early the disciple of Jesus took the name, adopted the Christian denomination, which means messianic. It means disciples of the Messiah, messianic. In Aramaic is Mashiach. Mashiach is Messiah in Aramaic, also in Hebrew. And why did they do it? Because it's a much more simpler denomination. In order to understand that Nazariah means messianic, you have to go through the whole Jewish tradition. You have to know Isaiah. You have to be Jewish, and you have to be a bit learned in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish culture. And the Christian denomination. Yes.
So essentially by using the word Christian rather than Nazariah is simply it's a shortcut. It's an easy way for outside of the Jewish tradition about, because they could easily, because Christ means Christos, Messiah.
Exactly, but Christian is also an Aramaic word. Huh? Mashiach is an Aramaic word. When we read in the Acts that the disciples took the Christian denomination, we don't know whether it was the Greek denomination, Christianoi, based on the Messiah word translation into Greek. Christ is Messiah in Greek.
Yeah.
We don't know whether it was the Greek denomination or the Aramaic one. It's the same, Mashiach, which was used by every Christian Aramaic speaking in the Middle East and elsewhere. Mashiach is exactly the same word. And so the disciple of Jesus took this denomination, which led then to the question, who were the ones who did not want to be called Mashiach, who did not want to be called Christian, and who kept with the Nazariah denomination? Were they still the real true disciples of Jesus? They were not Christian because they didn't want to be called Christians. And so there were some people after Jesus, after the first Christian, who took on the Nazariah denomination, who were not Christian, but who claimed to be the disciples of Jesus. That's the meaning of the word Nazariah now. And who were there? Who were they? That's the question. And in the ancient sources, from Epiphanius, from Jerome, Augustine, and other writers in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, up to the 5th century, we see mentions of Nazarene people, Nazariah people, Nazoraios people. We don't know exactly who they are, apart from them being of Jewish descent and accepting Jesus as Israel Messiah, but they are not Christians. Jerome wrote in one of his letters to Augustine that they did not cease to observe the old law. They were still they still abided by Moses' law. So they were Jews, kind of Jews, who believed in Jesus' messiahship. But for them, Jesus' messiahship did not have the same meaning as it was for the Christian. So maybe for them its messiahship is claimed to Israel kingdom, Israel, to the kingship of Israel. It might be what Epiphanius tells us in his Panarion in the 29th chapter. He writes about some Nazarene people who call themselves also Jesseans, people from Jesse. You see how this pertains to the Isaiah prophecy, the netzer, the branch that shall grow out of the stem of Jesse. And maybe they were monarchists. They were kind of nostalgic of the old kingdom in Israel and wanted it to be restored and wanted Jesus to restore this kingship. But you see, we don't have anything about them after the 5th century. We don't find anything in the sources, and there is a sort of big blank up until the Quranic text, because in the Quranic text we see the word Nazarene again. So this leads us to the question, who are the Quranic Nazarene? Were they still Christian or not? And who are the Quranic Nazarenes Christians? And we will see in the Quranic text itself what the text has to tell us. So this is exactly the same method as before, as with the people of the book mentioned. We will look at every occurrence, every mention of the word Nasara, Nasrani, Nazarene in the Quran. We will look at it for what it means, and we will make comparison. We will try to distinguish the meaning of the expression based on the context, on the verses, on what the verses mean. So, at first, when we look at the Nazarene mentioned in the Quran, we will see that the Nazarene are not Christian, even though the Standard Islamic Narrative tells us they are supposed to be Christian. They cannot be Christian because of the text. It's hiding it in plain sight. But when we look at so many verses, we cannot think that we cannot take the Quranic Nazarene for Christians. So in the Surah 3, verse 65 to 67, we see the people of the book, which we now know that it means Jews. O Jews, why do you dispute about Abraham when the Torah and the Gospel, Injil, in Arabic, did not come down until after him? Do you not reason then? Abraham was neither Jewish nor Nazarene. We see here maybe there is a link, something to be something to be to be fathomed. There is a rhetoric in the text. We have on one side the Torah, the Gospel, on the other side Jewish, Nazarene, which could mean that the Jewish have the Torah, and the Nazarene have the Injil, maybe. But we see also that the Nazarene are not to be confused, are not to be seen as associationists, because there is the word, and there is the mention, he was not one of the associationists, which means, of course, that the associationists, excuse me, associationists who are Christians cannot be Jewish nor Nazarenes. The Nazarenes are not associationists, hence they are not Christians. And
perfect, yeah.
We see this also in Surah 5, verse 51. How you believe, do not take the Jews and the Nazarenes, wal Nasara, for friends. They are friends of each other. And we know that in the 7th century, Jews and Christians were enemies. They were complete, total enemies. There have been some events, some revolts, some massacres, some slaughters, some involving also slavery. And it is not possible to think, even for 1 second, that Jews and Christians could be friends at this time. So it's not possible then to think that the Nazarene could be Christian, because the Christians are not very friendly towards the Jews, and the Jews were not very friendly towards Christians at this time. So the Nazarenes
Odon,
are not Christian. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, like,
Yes,
even putting aside, yeah. So even putting aside the events that happened in Jerusalem, where there was Christians massacred, there was also the Jewish king in Yemen back in the previous century, who was involved with persecuting Christians and trying to convert them and so on. So it's really clear that they couldn't have been friends at that time.
Yes, they could not have been friends in the 5th century, and even more in the 7th, because there were the events in Jerusalem that you alluded to, but there were also a very large Jewish revolt in the Byzantine Empire, and the Jewish people, the Jews, revolted against the Christian rule at the beginning of the 7th century. So they were not friends at this time. Yeah. So it's not possible to think that, and because of this, that the Nazarene are Christian in this verse.
And just to add one other thing, the fact that Heraclius tried to forcibly convert them and have them baptized would not have helped that whole situation either. So I think it's pretty rock solid to say that at that time, Jews and Christians were not friends. That's pretty solid, I think, to say.
There are also a theological background, a religious background to this. We know that the one who are called Jews in the 7th centuries mostly are rabbinic Jews, are Jews who refused Jesus as the Messiah, and because of this, they strongly opposed the Christian. So it's basic common sense. When you look at this verse, you cannot take the Nasara word and pretend it means Christian. It's the same also in the same Surah 5, in the verse 69. Certainly you will find that the most violent of people in enmity to the believers are the Jew and those who associate, Ladina Ashraku, which means Christians, the Jews and the Christian. And certainly you will find that the closest of them in affection to the believers are those who say, we are Nazarenes, Nasara. So here we have a very explicit verse who tells that the associates, that the Nazarenes cannot be Christian. The associates are supposed, according to this verse.
Odon, just to interrupt you. Just to interrupt you first.
Yes, do
just to interrupt you. The point that you're making is that we can. Yes, sorry. So the point you're making here is that we can see clearly in Surah 5:69 that the word Christians is used in distinction to the believers who are the Nazarene. That's
believers.
That's a very well-made point there.
The believers, the Mu'minin, are the Arabs who are taught by the Nasaras or by some Arab prophets or teachers. We see here that the believers are not the same as the Nazarenes. The closest of them in affection to the believers are the Nazarene. So we have two distinct categories: the believers and the Nazarenes. Maybe the Nazarenes are also believers, but in this verse, it's what we read in a very explicit manner, we read that the believers are the Arabs, and the Arabs who listen to the Quranic preaching, and that they are not Nazarenes. We see also that the Nazarene have priests and monks, which is a bit strange, and we'll keep that for later. Also in Surah 22.
Sorry,
Yes?
Sorry, Odon. Could the word believers here refer to more than the Nazarenes? So therefore, inside that wider, it's a wider set. So the Nazarenes are a subset of the believers. So therefore, in that wider set, you can have priests and monks, and that would resolve the meaning of the text. Does that make sense?
It could make sense, but you see, in order to make sense, to really make sense, we should look at all dimensions of believers, mu'minin, in the text, which we could do in another part of the presentation.
Yeah,
but
okay,
this is the only way. To be sure. This is the only way to be sure. One cannot hesitate or argue with a meaning or another meaning. It would only be hypothesis. We have to look at every mention. It's the only way to be sure. And
yeah.
Here we yes, I would agree with you, and I've told it before. The believers, the category, the believers, we find the Nazarene in them. They believe in the same thing as the believers. You see, this is not a surprise for you. I think it's not a surprise for the audience also. I will make the hypothesis in this presentation that the Nazarenes are the good community among the people of the book. And we will see that I have it is a very strong claim, because it is what the text tells us. And we have seen formerly in the first part of the presentation that the good community among the people of the book had the true faith that they were believers. So of course, then Nazarene are believers, but it is not what we can. From this single verse, we cannot tell it. It's from a global reading of the Quran that we can tell it, but not from this single verse. So let's go to Surah 22, verse 17. Surely those who believe, those who Judaized, who became Judean, and the Sabaeans, and the Nazarene, and the Magian, and the Christians, because there are those who associate in the text, Ladina Ashraku. Surely God will decide between them on the day of resurrection. So here we see that there are two distinct categories, Nazarene and Christian, and also others, which means that the Christians are not Nazarenes, and the Nazarenes are different from those who associate, and we know that those who associate are Christians. So the Nazarenes are not Christians.
Brilliant.
They are something else. We will see now that the Nazarene belong to the people of the book, but they are different from most of the people of the book, most of the Jews. None shall enter the garden except he who is a Jew or Nazarene. And we will see that we have many verses who agglomerate, who make a sort of single categories of Jews and Nazarene. The Jews do not be pleased with you or Nazarene until you follow their religion. They have something in common. There is a common religion, a sort of common ground, a common religious ground between Jews and Nazarenes. Be a Jew, be a Nazarene, be Jews or Nazarene, and you will be on the right course. Say, nay, we follow the religion of Ibrahim, and so on. And Ibrahim was not a mushrikun. We see also here that it's another verse which explains that the Nazarenes cannot be Christians, because once again we see an enumeration. We see different categories being presented, and Christian is not the same as Nazarene, is not the same as Jews. So Nazarene, here again,
Excellent.
cannot be confused with Christians. And here we see also that they have something in common with Jews. And the Jews and the Nazarenes say, we, so there is a community here, we are the sons of God. So from those verses, we can say that there is a common religious background between Jews and Nazarenes. We see also that the Jews and the Nazarene have the same book, surely the Torah. They recite the book, the Torah. Huh? The book, when you see the book, in this time, it means the Bible. But here, with the context, because we are speaking about the Jews, it means the Torah. It is the book. The book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, do you say that Ibrahim and Ishmael and Jacob and the tribes were Jews or Nazarenes? And also, Ibrahim was not a Jew nor a Nazarene. Here, I think we have something of an ethnic community between Jews and Nazarene. It's not only religious, it's also ethnic. Maybe a common ethnicity. But you see, at this time, even at this time, ethnicity and religion were very, very linked. You were Jew because you were.
Odon.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, Mel.
Could I suggest? So could I suggest that perhaps the Nazarenes were associated with Syria?
There was a glitch associated
because
with what? What was the
there's a suggestion of ethnicity and with Syria, as if we're talking about a particular ethnicity distinct from the Jews. One suggestion I would have might be Syria, such as northern Syria, and one of the reasons for that is one of the reasons for that is the map that exists in your book, which locates different place names that are very similar to the word Nazareth. And so therefore, just using my logical brain, that maybe geographically, Syria seems to be a good connection group.
Yes, Syria is a good connection, of course, but it does not mean it's a different ethnicity. When we look into the old sources about the Nazarenes, but it's not the Quranic Nazarene. Huh? It's the Nazarene from the ancient times, the one that that we found in the old sources from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. Epiphanius, for example, it tells us that the Nazarenes fled from Jerusalem and established themselves in Syria, but also in Transjordania, and also in the north of Arabia. So this would explain why we find so many Nazarene names in Syria. But the thing with Nazarene name in Syria, if you look closely at the map, it's not about the Nazarene names, it's about the Quranic names. we find places in Syria that are very, very linked to the Quranic text. We found Mount Kaaba, for example. We found a Mecca place also, Abil Beit Mecca in Syria. It's in my book, in the Great Secret of Islam, which will be available in English, I hope, very soon. And but you can find it in French, in Arabic, and very soon also in German. The German translation is almost done. It needs only some proofreaders, some proofreading. So let's go back to our
Odon, can I interrupt?
Of course.
Odin, can I interrupt you for a second? There's a question here that, let me just see if I can put it on the screen. Might take a second. Okay, for some strange reason, it's frozen on me. If I can't get it on the screen, which it doesn't look like, it's been a bit slow. No, sorry.
Veronica at the well.
Unfortunately, the internet is. I'll read it. Unfortunately, when I tried to open the screen, it's been my computer decided.
I'll just quit the presentation, and then we can chat with the question.
No, that wasn't the question. Okay. Here's the question. God, my computer. I think it might come up now. From the Nazarene masters to Arab followers, why do they refer to themselves as the third party, the Nazarene, and not as us? That was the question.
Maybe because it's not a collection of writing from the Nazarene masters, but from the Arab followers themselves, or maybe from the Arab preachers who refers to their Nazarene masters. But as we will see in the presentation, the Quranic text is not homogeneous. We see that some parts have been written by different people. Maybe some parts could have been written by the Nazarene masters themselves. Maybe some parts, but some other, for sure, they were written by the preachers, the Arabic preachers. And we will see also that we have different timing, different periods of time in the Quran. Some were written at a certain time. Some were written thereafter, and the meaning of the text changes between those periods, between those times.
Yeah. I just want to say, Elias, thank you very much for that question. It was an excellent question. Yeah.
Yes, it's a very good question because it helps to clarify, to bring light, and this is why we should always answer questions. So let's go back to the presentation. And I will share my screen, reshare my screen.
Yeah.
I think it's this one. No, it's not the good one.
Okay.
No, there's a bit of lagging. It will come back.
Yeah.
Oh.
Can I share it on the screen? Okay, might take a second, but it should be up now in a moment.
Yeah. All right. We were talking about the common ethnicity between Jews and Nazarenes, and this we will also see that the Jews and the Nazarene are told to be friends of each other. So this is a strong claim to explain that the Nazarene could belong to the people of the book, but they are not to be confused with the Jews, because as we see here in those verses, they are always distinguished. There is always a distinction between Jews and Nazarene, between Judeans and Nazarene, so between rabbinic Jews and Nazarenes. So maybe here again, this could be that the Nazarenes are the right community, the good community that we saw in the first part of the exposé. The good community among the people of the book, the small minority. Also, they are a bit special, and this is why we see that they are different from the Jews because they have priests and monks. And since the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in the year 70, there are no more priests among the Jews. The temple religion is over. The temple sacrifice are over. So the priests who were the one who made the sacrifice at the temple are no more. There are still Levi people, and among them the Kohanim people who are the descendant of the priests, but they do not perform at the temple anymore. And so it's a bit strange. We see here that we have Nazarene who are Jews, who belong to the people of the book, but they have priests and monks. Priests. How come they have priests? We know that among the Christians, there are priests who claim to be the descendants of the priest of the Temple of Jerusalem. It's the Christian faith. They perform the sacrifice of the Christ during the Mass instead of the sacrifices that were made in the temple. Excuse me, we've got a phone call. And
yeah,
I have to.
No problem. Do you want me to put you on mute?
No. It's okay. It's okay. I just ignored the call. And but I've kept my smartphone on. Please. I kept my smartphone on because it allows me to see the questions, to see the screen, and it's better this way for me. I can see the chat. I can see the chat this way. So excuse me for this.
Okay.
For this.
That's
back to our priests and monks. So we see that the Nazarene belong to the people of the book, but they are different because they are named as a distinctive category. They are not Jews exactly. They are not the Jews. They belong to the Jews. They are not the Jews, and they have priests. So maybe there is something Christian about them, something that will relate them to Jesus' teaching. Priests and monks, and also they are not arrogant. We saw before that the arrogance was something something that the preachers, the Quranic preachers, told about the Talmudic, the rabbinic Jews. They were arrogant. So also it's another distinction between Jews and Nazarenes. So they belong to the people of the book, but they are not the same as most of the Jews. They are not the rabbinic Jews. They are something else. Here, there is a slight mistake in the presentation. Excuse me. You see the conclusion before the whole of the presentation. The text presents us, the Quranic text presents us the Nazarene as being the friends of the believers. We have many verses that tells us that the Nazarenes are friends of the believers, friends of the Mu'minin, of the Arabs that are taught by the Quranic preachings. For example, Surah 2:62. So those who believe, those who Judaize, and the Nazarene, the Sabian, and so on, they shall have their reward from their lords. Those who believe, those who Judaize, it's almost the same verse. And the Nazarene, whoever believe in God the last day, they shall have no fear, nor shall they grieve. And we see here that the Nazarene have a common religion with the believers. They share something with the believers. And we have this famous verse in the Surah 5, verse 82. Certainly we find that the most violent of people in enmity to the believers are the Jews and the one who associates, meaning the Christians. Certainly we'll find that the closest of them in affection to the believers are those who say, we are Nazarenes. And again, that is because there are priests and monks among them, and because they are not arrogant. We saw this beforehand. So the Nazarene are the closest in affection. They are friends of the believers. So this is my conclusion here. The first part of my conclusion. The Quranic Nazarenes are believers. They are not the believers. They are part of the believers. They believe. They have the same good faith as the believers. They are the good Judeans. They are the good community within the people, among the people of the book. Since then, they must be non-Talmudic. And here we have something also we have established something on which we can build some hypotheses. And this is how I work. Once I have established something, I can use it to build new hypotheses and so on. So let's continue to the part when we see that the Nazarenes are also described in the text as being the enemies or not the friends of the believers, which is very strange. Because as we saw here, we have the description of the Nazarene as being the friends, here as being the enemies or not the friend of the believers. So it cannot be, this situation cannot exist at the same time. And we have to assume
so it's from a different.
Yes, it's from a different period of time. We have the very famous verse 30, Surah 9, in which we see that the Nazarene are confused with Christians and with kuffars. We saw in the first part of the presentation that mostly in the text, the kuffars are the one who covered the Torah, who covered the prophecies, and who didn't want to recognize Jesus as Israel's Messiah. This is the true meaning of the kafir root, kuffar. And so the kuffar are not the infidels or the unbelievers. This is a derived meaning, a second meaning, a third meaning. But the first meaning, the basic meaning is the coverers, the one who covers the sacred scriptures, who covers the prophecies of Jesus' messiahship. And so here in Surah 9, it's very, very strange because it contradicts many other verses. It contradicts the fact that we have established earlier that the Nazarenes are supposed to be Christians. And here the verse says the Messiah is the Son of God. The Nazarene is supposed to say the Messiah is the Son of God. How come is it? It cannot be. It cannot coexist in the same text. So we must come to the conclusion that it pertains to two different situations, two different periods of time. And also in Surah 5, verse 14, we see that there has been a covenant with the Nazarene. This is very important, a covenant, a sort of alliance with the Nazarene. We saw in the first part that there was an ummah between the good community among the people of the book and the believers, the Arab believers. So maybe it pertains to the same thing. And so the verse explained to us that there was a covenant, but the covenant is over now, and there is no more friendship. And so this is a very strong hint, a very strong clue that that is convergent in the same direction. There was a friendship. There is no more friendship. There was a covenant. It is over now. Maybe it's the explanation for this odd, bizarre verse 51 in Surah 5. Or you believe? Yes. Yes, Mel.
Odon, can I just clarify? Just to clarify, and maybe for the benefit of the audience, you're talking about them falling out with who exactly? The writers of the text, or with the rabbinical Jews? Who are they falling out with?
Here, I don't get your point exactly. Maybe you can try to explain your question.
So, yeah, it's like, say you're using Surah 5:14, or the covenant is over, no more friendship. So we're talking about the friendship with who exactly? The rabbinical Jews, or with the people who are behind the Quran?
No, I'm sorry, it was so obvious to me. I should have explained it. There was a covenant between the Nazarenes and the believers. It's obvious in the text. This verse is a preaching toward the believers. The one who preach this verse, or what is written in this verse, is preaching to Arab believers, and he tells them about the covenant that is now over, the covenant that is broken. There was a covenant between the believers and the Nazarenes, but they neglected a portion of what they were reminded of, and so on, and therefore we excited among them enmity. So in the standard Islamic narrative, this is God who is supposed to be speaking here. But we see it cannot be, because how come God could speak like this and say, and God will inform them of what they did? So here we have a preacher speaking, a preacher who was an ally, a friend of the Nazarenes, and who has broken the covenant, who is not a friend of the Nazarene anymore. And he explains to the audience, to the Arab audience, that the alliance is broken, that the covenant is no more. I think so.
Odon,
I think it's what.
Yes. What I'm my difficulty now with this is that it was my understanding that the Nazarenes were the preachers, but now I'm getting the impression that no, the Nazarenes were a separate group from the people who were preachers, which has confused me. So I'm a little bit confused by that.
Yes, I understand. I get your point. In some verses, it might be that the preacher is a Nazarene himself. But you see, in most of the verses, it's not the case. It's an Arabic preacher preaching to an Arabic audience. This Arabic preacher, or those Arabic preachers, might be very close to the Nazarenes. Maybe some of them are half Arabic, half Nazarene, but they are not Nazarene themselves. The Nazarene are they don't they try to blend in, to mix with the Arabs. We saw that they they are invited the Arabs to marry their daughters and to share their food. We saw this in the first part of the presentation. But this also tells us that there is a Nazarene community, a Quranic Nazarene community, which is distinct from the Arabic, from the Arab community, from the Arab believers community.
Okay, so what I would suggest that maybe the group who are the preachers, if they're not the Nazarenes, which I thought that was the thesis, which I've got misunderstood. Perhaps that group then is, as Joe suggests, another group such as the Edomian Karaites, and then that will kind of make some sense, because it doesn't seem logical to me that these are a group of Arabs without. It doesn't make logical sense for me that these are just Arab preachers with no background in anything, that they're not connected to a particular group. So
they are connected.
That's my difficulty in terms of
the Arab preachers are very connected to the Nazarene. They are taught by the Nazarenes. The preachers are Arabs who are taught by the Nazarenes. This is what.
So the master preachers then must be Nazarene, though.
Yes, maybe
the master preachers must be Nazarene.
Might be, but we see in the Standard Islamic Narrative, in the Islamic tradition, that this master preacher should have been Muhammad, and Muhammad was very close to some people who are described in the tradition as being Nazarene. His wife Khadija was Nazarene, or might have been Nazarene, or half Nazarene, because her cousin, Waraka bin Naufal, in the tradition, we don't know whether this figure, this character is real, historical or not, but is described as being a Nazarene priest. So we see that in the very entourage, in the very family of the master preacher Muhammad, there were some Nazarene people. And this is what the text is about. We see Arabic preachers that are being taught by master teachers and master Nazarene preachers, and those Arabic preachers are taught to preach to the Arabic Christian people in order to make them believe in the Nazarene creed, and in order to have them join a certain grand venture that we see in another part of the presentation. Do you get my point?
So essentially,
Mel?
if I can just summarize it. Sorry, Odin, can I just talk a second? So essentially, it seems like having. Sorry, Odin. So essentially, I think there's about a 5-second lag between us, so it's difficult. But so essentially, what has happened is that the Nazarene master preachers, having got the apprentice preachers up and running, those apprentice preachers basically are cut ties with their original masters and go off in a different tangent. So there was some sort of breakup in the link. So the disciples decided that they were greater than their masters, essentially. And so this probably, I think in your book, you mentioned that I think it was around the 640s, maybe, if I'm not mistaken, unless I'm hearing, remembering Joe, there was a breakup with the Nazarenes or something.
Yes, this is my hypothesis, based on a bit on the Quranic evidence that I'm presenting tonight, and some other Quranic evidence, and also based on some other material telling us about the rebuilding of Jerusalem temples and other studies. And yes, this is my point. There was an alliance in which, at the time, in which some master Nazarene teachers, maybe preachers themselves, taught Arabic preachers their faith and taught how to preach to the Arabic people. And what we see in the Quran, in most of the Quran, is the drafts, the instruction that the Nazarene made for the Arabic preachers, or the notes that the Arabic preachers took when they were taught by the Nazarene themselves. And with this in mind, when we read this verse 14 in Surah 5, it makes sense. This is here we have an Arabic preacher who used to be linked to a Nazarene master, who claims now to be free from the Nazarene rule, and he explained the Arabic audience why it is so. He said that the covenant is broken because the Nazarene did something wrong. We don't know exactly, but the text tells us they neglected a portion of what they were reminded of, and therefore we, the preachers, we, the Arabic leaders, exciting among them enmity and hatred to the day of resurrection. And God will inform them of what they did. Which means also that the day of resurrection hasn't come yet. We see in the rest of the text so many mentions to the day of resurrection, the fact that it is very close, it will come, and it is what the believers, the preachers, thrived. They have thrived to the day of resurrection. And here, the day of the resurrection has not happened. Maybe it has something to do with the covenant being broken. Maybe it's because the day of resurrection should have happened, and it did not happen. And this is why the covenant was broken. This is
or maybe,
hypothesis I
or,
make.
Perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
or perhaps maybe they're blaming. Perhaps they're blaming the Nazarenes for breaking the covenant, which resulted in the Messiah never coming, or something. Maybe it could be either way.
Yes, I think that's the reason why the covenant was broken. But there is no explicit clue in this verse for this. We have to take a global reading of the Quran to see that there is something about Jesus coming that it did not happen. I don't remember whether I spoke about it in the first part in the general introduction, but in the Quran we see a very solid biblical background. The Quran alludes to a biblical culture in which there is supposed to be a day of resurrection, an apocalypse, and the coming of the Messiah. And in the Quranic text, there is a great void, which is the coming of the Messiah at the end of the days, at the end of times. It's very strange. You see, the Quran is very biblical. It talks about the last days and the day of the resurrection, and in all logic, it should then talk about the coming of the Messiah, because in the biblical culture, this is what happens at the end of days, at the day of the resurrection. So why is there no mention in the Quran of the coming of Jesus at the end of times? And why are there so many mentions in the oral tradition, in the hadith, of this coming? And this is something we have to think about it. And I've thought a lot about it also. And I think it's because when the Quran was preached, when most of it was preached, the people were hoping for Jesus to come back, to return, and he did not return. And so when the Quran was made as a book, when there was a selection of the good pages, the good folios, of course, they did not take at the time, the pages, the preachings that mentioned the coming of Jesus, because there was a sort of deception, a failure. It did not come. They wanted it to come, and it did not come. And this is why the Quran is without those mention to the coming of Jesus. So this is an explanation.
This might also explain. So this might also explain the fact that points in the Quran, it's gaps. You know, there's clearly it's on one theme. There's a gap. It jumps onto another theme, and it seems like something has been cut out. So maybe that's that's been going on.
This is what we see when we read the text.
I suppose as the religion evolved over time. Sorry, Odon. As the religion evolved over time, their idea of what was important, what they wanted to keep, and what they wanted to drop out would have changed over time as their sort of the overall ideas of the religion matured. And so this would have meant that the Quran wasn't fixed maybe till quite late. It was constantly under a process of revision as
Yes.
As they try to iron out all of these contradictions, and even despite many attempts at ironing out the contradictions, we can still see that there are contradictions here because of the fact that there are different writers at the different times with different points of view.
And this is what is difficult in the Quran. Is most of the scholars and even more the Muslim scholars, they claim that the text is homogeneous, that it has been written as by one person as a whole. You see, and this is not the case. What we see it is very, very obvious in the text is that the Quranic text is a corpus, which is a collection of different texts that have been put together, and there has been a sort of edition effort that was made in order to make the text appear as one book. But it is not the case. It's not a book. It's a collection of texts from different times, mainly from the beginning of the 7th century, I think. But they are not. All the texts are not from the beginning of the 7th century. I think, for example, that the verse we are seeing now on the screen, 930, 514, 551. They have been written after the year 640, or they have been changed. There have been some change, some correction in them after the year 640. And we will see this in the third part of the presentation, because we will have a look at the beginning of Surah 9, which is very odd, very different from the rest of the Quran. From most of the rest of the Quran, and we will see that it adds some new stuff, some new events that did not exist at the time in which most of the rest of the Quran was uttered, was preached. So
definitely feels like something.
It's a very, very important point you just made here. Thank you, Mel, for your question. This is how we can really add some more light in a very complex matter. But you see, when you look at the text for what it really means, it makes all things much more simpler. Here we don't build hypotheses on some things that don't exist. It's a text. This is the literal meaning of the Quranic text. And when we read it, we see that there are different periods of times. We see that we have different preachers. We see we have different ideas, different events. And we can make something of it, but it's based on reality. It's not based on fantasies. It's not based on books of tradition that have been written 200, 300, 400 years after the events. And I think we are much closer to the historical truth working like this than making something else. And okay, so let's go back to the presentation.
Okay, so do you want to move on to your?
I have some.
I was just going to say, if you want to move on towards the conclusion.
Exactly.
Because we've stalled on this quite a bit. Let's move on.
Just before, I just told you that there might have been some corrections in the text, which some parts of the Quranic text, some verses might have been corrected, and it could explain some of the contradictions also. And this pertains to the text being written and edited and selected at different periods of times. It pertains to the fact that the face evolved. It was not the same face at the beginning of the 7th centuries than in the mid-50s of the 7th centuries, in the 8th centuries, in the 9th centuries. It was not the same face. The things evolved. And we have a proof, I think, of correction in this verse, the verse 51 of Surah 5, in which there is this very, 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 very strange case. The Jews and Nazarenes are supposed to be friends of each other, and like I explained it a bit earlier, it's particularly on this verse that some Muslim scholars explain that Nasara cannot mean Christian. It means something else, because like we saw it, Jews and Christians were enemies at this time. They are not friends of each other. It's very strange. And when we look at the Quran, we see that it contradicts many other verses in which the Nazarene are supposed to be friends of the believers, and also that there are mentions in other parts of the Quran that kind of contradicts also this verse. In Surah 8, verse 73, we see that the one who are friends of each other are those who cover. Aladina kafaru. So it's not Jews and Nazarenes, it's those who cover here. And in Surah 4, verse 89, we see that the hypocrites, munafiqun, the one who rejected the faith, who used to be believers who don't believe anymore, they would like you to cover as they have covered, but take no friend from their rank until they immigrate in the way of God. Here also, I think it's very obvious that the verse 51 in Surah 5 has been rewritten. And there was an original version in which it was written, "O you who believe, do not take the Jews for friends. They are friends of each other." This makes sense. This makes complete sense. It makes sense in itself in the verse. It makes sense with the other verses of the Quran, with the Surah 8 and Surah 4. And it also makes sense in terms of I don't know the word for it. When you sing the Quran, when you psalmodiate the Quran, like the muezzin does, for example, like you do, you see, I told you about Edouard Marie Galez. He worked with Antoine Moussali. I told you about him in our the first part of our expose. Antoine Moussali, who knew most of the Quran by heart, and who was able to sing the Quran, to chant the Quran as Hufaz do, as some Muslims do. And by singing it, you see that there is a sort of discrepancy in this verse 51. Something.
So the poetry of it, or the
the poetry,
it's a sign that it's been tampered with.
The rhymes. Yes, it has been tampered. It has been tampered. It does not fit the former verse and the following. That's something strange. And so, if this verse,
Odon, can I interrupt you just for? Yes. Sorry, Odon, can I just interrupt you? Can you hear me?
Of course.
You don't seem to hear me. It takes a few seconds, but it's interesting that you're saying that Surah 551 seems to have been changed, because I found evidence independent of what you're presenting today that verse 560 seems to be a late addition from later than the 740s, no earlier than 743. So this is quite interesting that you're also talking about an interpolation for the same surah.
What evidence? It's
well, it's going to be in. It's going to be in a presentation in a video I'm going to do tomorrow. So I better not reveal it just now because I spoil the surprise for people. But it's based on a historical event, which I believe the verse was in response to. And so therefore it couldn't have happened. It couldn't have been written before that particular year.
You see, what I'm presenting tonight, it has been for me a very, very long and hard work, because I've checked every verse in Arabic with the tools I presented, like corpus.quran.com, getaway.quran.com, and also I've checked the ancient manuscripts. And in the ancient manuscripts, which you have on the Corpus Coranicum project website, I haven't found discrepancies in this verse, in this Surah 5, verse 51 passage. I don't think, I don't remember any. But you see, when you look at the the oldest manuscript.
Sorry, are you saying that the verse was different?
No, I'm saying that you can find.
So are you saying that in the
oldest manuscript, you see many verses that have been tampered with? You see corrections, you see palimpsests. You can see them. They are there in manuscript from the end of the 7th century and the beginning of the 8th century. There is a very, very, very interesting manuscript called the Wettstein 2, 1913, which contains almost 80% of the Quranic text, and in which you have many layers of scriptures. There is a first layer, only the razm, only the consonants, and there are layers that have been added, in which you see the diacriticism, in which we see corrections. Sometimes you see that the text has been scratched and written over. You see additions and so on, and it's very interesting when you look at it, and when you check some odd verses like this one. Yes, Mel.
Yeah, I feel that you're kind of going away. I think you're kind of going away from the original sort of point about Surah 551. I must tie you down on this one, because are you saying that the early verses that you found? Just wait a second, right? Are you saying that in the earliest manuscripts it excludes the phrase "the Nazarenes," or are you saying something completely different? Because you're losing me. I'm not quite getting where you're going with this.
What I'm saying is I've checked in the earliest manuscript, and this verse is we do not see any tampering.
Different.
Which means then that the tampering dates from before the writing of those manuscripts. So maybe before the year 703 you're speaking about.
Okay, so the addition of the phrase "the Nazarenes" came in quite early.
Yes, I think it came early. I think it came around the year 640, in the 640s, in the 650s, maybe a bit later, but it was during the 7th century.
Right, we got
for sure. But here, I think if we claim that this verse has been tampered with, then what is then to think of all the other mentions of a relationship between Jews and Nazarene? And here we have a question. Maybe all the other verses we saw in which the Jew and the Nazarenes are linked together, maybe they have been tampered with also. But they have been tempered in a manner that that is plausible. You see, when you associate Jews and Nazarene, it has to be plausible. the people won't believe an association between Jews and I don't know, Ethiopians or I don't know, Frankish people. It cannot be. No, you have to think of something to make a link between them. For example, their ethnicity. And I think this is what we have here in the Quran, and this will be the conclusion of the. We can fathom a sort of evolution of the relationship between the Quranic Nazarene and the believers, based on what we saw here, based on the different period of time that we saw, the difference in the relationship. I think at the beginning, there was the time of the covenant, in which we had Arabs that were taught by the Quranic Nazarene, that were taught by Arab preachers that were taught themselves by the Quranic Nazarenes. And so we had Arabs, we had the Quranic Nazarenes, and together they formed the community. They formed the Huma we talked about in the first part of the expose. And there were also the Kufar, the coverers, who were the rabbinical Jews. And we saw that rabbinical Jews and Nasara were formed together the people of the book. They were the Al-Kitab. And there were the Mushrikun, the Christians, and the Mushrikun and the rabbinical Jews were the enemies of the believers. This is what was the situation at the time of the covenant, at the time of the first preaching. But things evolved, things changed. The covenant was broken, and the relationship evolved, and the Huma, the community, was reduced to the believers only, to the Arabs, and the Nasara were excluded from the community. They were still the people of the book with the Kufar, and this is why we see such condemnations of Nasara and rabbinical Jews in the same verses. When we see that Nasara and rabbinical Jews are friends of each other, this can make sense because they share a common ethnicity. And
this reminds me, Odon, of in the first. Can you hear me, Odon? This reminds me of the first century when the Jews and Christians. This reminds me in the first century, the Jews and Christians were still praying together in the synagogue, but eventually the Jews expelled the Christian Jews. So essentially, there was a time when they coexisted, but eventually they divided. So again, similar idea. So at one point they were united as a group, and then finally, the apprentice preachers stood on their own feet and formed their own community without the need of their masters, essentially.
Yes. But you see, the analogy you just made has some limits, because at the very beginning of Christianity, everyone was Jew. You see, the first Christians were Jews, and the other Jews were asking themselves about Jesus. And some joined Christianity and became Christian Jews, and some didn't want to become Christians, and they formed mainly the rabbinic movement after the destruction of the temple in the first century. And so here at the stage of the breaking, after the breaking of the covenant, we still have Christians who are the Mushrikun, and together they are the enemies now of the believers. So the believers used to have to have a community with Nasara, and the community was broken. And thereafter, there comes the Standard Islamic Narrative. Maybe hundreds of years later, 200 of years later, it was built little by little, step by step. And in this Standard Islamic Narrative, there is another story. the Ummah, the community, is now the community of Muslims, and only Muslims, and not the Arab believers, and not the Arab taught, of course, by the Nazarenes. There is no rabbinical Jews anymore. There is only Yahud. The Jews are all the same. We don't. The Standard Islamic Narrative does not make the difference between rabbinical Jews and non-rabbinical Jews. They are all Jews. They are all Yahud, Kufars also, but there is not the distinction that we found in the Quranic text. And the Nasara are not supposed to be Christians, according to the Standard Islamic Narrative. And together, Muslims, Yahud, and Christians form the people of the book, the new meaning of the people of the book. So, in the Standard Islamic Narrative, the people of the book are not the Jews anymore. They are something else, something new, something very new. And we still have the Mushrikun, but the Mushrikun are not the Christians, they are pagans, supposed to be polytheists. And in a derived meaning, it can also mean Christians. But this helps the scholars.
But not in the primary meaning.
It's not the primary meaning, but by giving Mushrikun also a derived meaning, a second meaning of Christian, it helps to support the Standard Islamic Narrative in the way that the scholars, the Muslim scholars, can give the word Mushrikun any meaning they want. In some mention, it can be pagan, non-Christian pagan. In some others, it can be Christian. And by doing so, they can legitimate with the Quranic text their narrative. The narrative is not true to the text. It's true to the Sunnah. It's true to the Islamic tradition.
Yeah.
But it is not true to the literal text of the Quran. And together, the Yahud, the Nasara, the Mushrikun are the unbelievers, the Kufar. And the Kufar, the meaning of the word also has evolved. The basic meaning of covering is fades away, and it becomes infidel, non-Muslim. And here we have, I think, a sort of synthesis of the evolution of the relationships between the Quranic Nazarenes and the believers. So, to conclude and to introduce the third part of the expose for another time, I would say that in the first and the second part, we have seen now that the Quran does not really tell us about Islam as a religion, but it tells us about something else. It tells us, in particular, about a Jewish polemic, a polemic between two currents of Judaism. So the Nazarenism, the Quranic Nazarenism, and since it is the Quran that defines this current of Judaism, and since we want to distinguish it from the other Nazarene meaning that we saw, Edouard Marie Galez decided to name it Judeo-Nazarenism to make a clear distinction. The Judeo-Nazarenism is the Quranic Nazarenism. It's not the Nazarenism from the first century, the second. We don't know the link of the between the Quranic Nazarenism. And so the two Qurans.
You're not.
Yes, Mel. Please go on.
No, just to make the point that you're not trying to make a historical continuity claim from the earliest century all the way through. It's just what's important is there was a group in the 7th century that had these beliefs. That's all. That's really key and important.
Yes, it's really important. We could make such a claim, but in a further step, and it will be an hypothesis based on very thin evidence. All we have now is a very strong Quranic evidence that there was a Quranic Nazarenism. This is all we have. And based on this, we could argue whether those Nazarenes in the Quran came from the Ebionites, came from another Quran, came from, we don't know. But all we know is that they exist because the Quranic text tells us so. It tells also about the existence of a forgotten Jewish group called the Nazarene. I think they are the Nazarene, but this Jewish group has been described by the Quranic text as being the one who is the right community among the Jews, the one who recognized Jesus as the Messiah, who is opposed to rabbinical Jews and opposed to Christians, who hold the Torah and the Gospel sacred, and pretend to have the unaltered text of those books. This forgotten Jewish group has the true faith. It believes in God, in the last day. It commends the decent, forbids the blameworthy, and is humble toward God. And a covenant has been established between this group and some Arabs. And this group, this forgotten Jewish group, and I think it is the Nazarenes, taught the Arab their faith and urged them into a great venture that is being described in the Quran also, and which we will see in another part of the expose. So the existence of the correct Nazarene is established by the Quran itself, apart from any other source. One could form then the hypothesis that those Nazarene might have something in common with other Nazarene from the past, other Nazarenes that we find in other sources older than the Quran. So we have subsequent questions that we will try to answer in another part of the expose. What exactly and why did the Quranic Nazarene teach the believers? What happened? What happened in the 7th century? Why was the covenant broken? Why was the name, the very name of the Nazarene, erased from Muslim memories? Because nowadays, no one remembers the Quranic Nazarenes as being a forgotten Jewish group. It has become a name for Christians. And so their name, their memory, has been erased from Muslim, from the Standard Islamic Narrative. And then we have to ask ourselves how and why was the Standard Islamic Narrative written. So we will see this in another part. This is to be continued. Next part will be about the grand venture the Quran is about.
Fantastic. Odon, an excellent presentation. There was some tricky bits to understand, but actually it kind of in the, as particularly with the conclusion there. How much for that? We have about 11 minutes or so for questions, if that's okay.
Yes.
Are you okay for another few minutes to take some questions?
Yes, of course. Of course.
Tony, you asked to be given time for a question. You mentioned at the beginning of the video. So if you want to hit us with a question, the floor is yours. If Tony is still with us. He's gone.
He's gone.
No, here he is. Okay, Tony, have you got a question? Because I think the last video I missed questions as you asked. So I'll just give you a minute or so to write up a question. That I haven't been following the chat too much.
Let me check on the. I have the.
Yeah, don't see any.
I have the video here, and I can see the question also.
You probably have it. Yeah, the questions are probably coming on your phone quicker than they appear on my end, because a bit of a lag. But
yeah, it's very strange. There is something like a 2 minute
from
lag
Tony. It seems. Anyone? Okay, here we go. Now here's the question from Tony. Let me put it on the screen. Did that go on the screen? Seems to be taking a while to come on.
Yeah.
Here we go. It's very slow on my end. So, do you believe Nazarene were, I don't know what you mean by duo, were duo believe and Christians were Trinity? I don't understand. Tony, would you like to rephrase the question in clear English? Because that doesn't make any sense to me.
I think I get it.
Do you believe Nazarene, did they believe in the Trinity maybe? Is that what you mean?
It says there is something very strange in the Quranic text. The Quranic text is the only thing that give us hints about the Nazarene creed. We don't know really what the Nazarene were, who they were, what did they believe in. We only have the Quranic text, and the Quranic text has been rewritten, has been selected, and it's it cannot be taken into account without a lot of critique, a lot of critical studies and work. In this text, we see.
Okay.
We see that.
Yes. Odon, just to clarify, is that they believed in just the Father and the Son, but not the Spirit? Is that binitarian? Would that be?
I don't. We have nothing in the text. We have nothing in the text to support this. But what we have in the text, this is what I was about to tell. In the text, we have some claims about Jesus not being crucified. I think it's Surah 4, verse 157. But when we really look into it, it does not claim that Jesus was not crucified. It just tells us that the claim of the Jewish people is wrong. The Jewish people cannot claim that they crucified Jesus. This is what the verse is about. And we see also in another verse, I don't remember, it's in Surah 5, but in another verse, we see that Jesus died and was elevated, was taken by God, and that he died. He really died. And this is very strange because this is not an Islamic claim. In the Standard Islamic Narrative, Jesus is supposed to have been taken by God before dying on the cross. And so maybe it was not him that was crucified, but someone else. But he did not die, and he is still alive with God, and he will be sent back at the end of the days. But the text does not tell us this. The text tells us that Jesus died, and hence maybe the Nazarene believed that Jesus died on the cross, and that God took him with him, and maybe they believed in the resurrection. We don't know, but it can be, because it is what the text tells us, and it's different from the Standard Islamic Narrative.
Okay, let's take another question. I think, let me just go back. There was a question about Petra. Do you believe that it all started in Mecca? I think what you're going to say, but I want to have a go at that. I think we're frozen.
Yeah, it's a bit frozen, but I think I got the question. The question was, did it begin in Mecca or Petra?
Let me just see if I can get. Yeah. So it's basically, what's your opinion on Dan Gibson's idea that it started in Petra? That was a question. I can't remember who asked that a few minutes ago. It says I'm breaking up here.
Okay. No, I just lowered the definition of my cam. Maybe it would It would help with the freezing and the lagging. So I don't think it began in Mecca. I don't think it began in Petra either, because the real starting point of Islam is the moment when the Standard Islamic Narrative, or the basics of the Standard Islamic Narrative, were written. And it was not written in Petra, not written in Mecca. Maybe it began a bit in Damascus. And for me, the starting point, the real starting point of Islam is Baghdad. It's among the Abbasids. It's when the Standard Islamic Narrative was written. Before that, we have something which looks like Islam, but it is not Islam yet. It is something else. I don't think there was then a unique starting point. We see that there were Arabs everywhere, in Syria, in northern Arabia, in Petra, but also in Mesopotamia, in northern Mesopotamia. We see that the events that gave birth to Islam took place everywhere also, in Mesopotamia, in Jerusalem, in Syria, in Egypt, in Arabia also. And there is no such thing as a unique birthplace. This claim to a unique birthplace comes from the Standard Islamic Narrative that wants to make everything fit with a Mecca narrative. But we will see in the third part of the expose that the verses that are used to describe Mecca, most of them, in fact, pertain to Jerusalem. The Hajj, for example, is supposed to be the pilgrimage to Mecca, but it's an Hebraic word that describes the one of the many Jewish pilgrimages to Jerusalem, the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred mosque, according to the Standard Islamic Narrative, does not designate the Haram in Mecca. It's a mention of the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem. Safa and Marwa were supposed to be hills, small hills in Mecca. There are, in fact, hills in Jerusalem. And there are not hills in
Related
Petra.
Question for you. So, related question. I'd like to answer it first, if I may. But can we find some teachings of the Nazarene to the Arabs in the Quran? My understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This sections in the Quran where it says "say" and then followed by a quotation would be some of the preachings being taught. So, for example, the Quran says "say," blah 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 blah. Is not part of the Nazarene preaching that's being passed on to the apprentices.
The thing is we cannot distinguish the Nazarene preaching from the Arabic preaching. We have made some distinction. We have identified some Arabic preaching opposed to the Nazarene in the verse Surah 5, verse 14, for example. Here we can say this is Arabic. They are opposed to the Nazarenes. But for the most of the rest of the text, we don't know whether it's purely Nazarene or purely Arabic. But it's the same. You see, I think the Quran is based on what I've told you, notes of preaching. Who made those notes? Maybe it's the Nazarene who wrote instructions and gave them to Arab preachers. But it could also be Arab preachers who wrote notes during their own schooling. And those notes became the Quran.
Related question.
So, kind of the same.
Related question. Was the monk Bahira a Nasara because Islamic sources he was from a region al-Nasara? I know Bahira is associated with a location in Syria as well, but does sort of fit.
So the thing with Bahira, it's very strange because the first mentions of Bahira are not found in Islamic sources, but in Christian sources. And the Standard Islamic Narrative took those sources and take the Bahira figure, the Bahira character, for granted. I think Bahira is a sort of a symbol that has been a character that has been invented by Christian writer to personify, to give some kind of color to the propagandist milieu, the propagandist entourage of Muhammad and the Arabic preacher, the Arab preachers. So Bahira is not an historical figure. Bahira is, it's a bit like Waraka bin Nawfal in the Islamic tradition. It's sort of a legend based on a thin historical background. In the writers of the Christian sources, they knew that the Islam, that the proto-Islam came from Nazarene preachers, Jewish milieu, and this is why they wrote about Bahira. This is very strange because nowadays
on that
Bahira
note,
has become.
I was just going to say, on that note, it might be good to stop there because we're just over 2 hours, and if we make it too long,
yes.
So
also
we'll be. So Odon, you're going to be back. So in part 3, you'll be back to kind of wrap up the whole story. So you've helped us a great deal in terms of understanding what's going on, and I think the thing that I will take away is how obvious it is that there's a composite from different times and places and different writers and so on, and that's a brilliant thing to take away. It's a very central, fundamental idea.
Thanks, Mel. I don't think I'll be able to wrap up everything in a third part. We are only talking here about Quranic evidence, and there is so much more. This is what your whole channel is about.
Oh, yeah.
But in terms of Quranic evidence,
it never ends. But
it never ends. Like you wrote it, every time you lift a stone, you find something underneath.
Absolutely, it never ends. But the thing for our audience to bear in mind is that both in your case and my case, we're just making our best effort at uncovering the truth, and sometimes we get it wrong, sometimes we're learning, we discover something new. We're making our very best attempt, basically.
So
anyway, thank you, Odon.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you a lot.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you. Take a second.